This video will discuss political parties in American government. Party influence is greatly declining in American government, and many Americans simply identify themselves as independent. Political parties, political action committees, mass media, and elections all link citizens to their government. Political parties specifically connect citizens to their government, run candidates for political office, and inform the public. By connecting Americans to the government, political parties increase political efficacy by helping citizens make sense of government decisions and processes, and to make them feel like the government is actually listening to them. When candidates run for office, their political parties help in organizing and funding their actual campaign. Although both major parties are by necessity broadly based, each party conveys an image and endorses policies that helps voters decide which candidate to support. Most countries have a multi-party system, so the United States is definitely a minority when it comes to that, because we have had a two-party system since the beginning of this country. We here in the U.S. have a two-party system because of a general consensus of values. We share the same values of individuality, equality, and liberty. Also because of historical influence, and also because of the winner-take-all system. Both parties have a national committee composed of representatives from each state and territory, a full-time paid national chairman that manages day-to-day work of the party, a national convention that meets formally every 4 years during the summer before a presidential election in November, a congressional campaign committee that assists both incumbents and challengers, and a broad but not always consistent ideological base to appeal to large numbers of voters. It's really important to know the term realignment for the AP government exam. Realignments are basically shifts in the voting that causes new parties to dominate government. So there might be a period in history where the Republican Party dominates Congress, but then, let's say 10 years after that, the Democratic Party dominates Congress. So there's a realignment in power in Congress during those years. Federalists and Anti-Federalists were the very first parties. They were concerned with the debate over the ratification of the Constitution. The issue was resolved with the addition of the Bill of Rights, but the parties didn't simply disappear. Federalists were then led by Alexander Hamilton and supported a central government, while the other party, Democratic Republicans, were led by Thomas Jefferson that supported state governments. Alexander Hamilton eventually died, and when Thomas Jefferson became president, he came to adopt many of the Federalist values. So then, during the era of good feelings, there was only one party rule, which was the Democrats. However, like I mentioned earlier, this didn't last long. The era of good feelings really came to a quick end because the two-party system reemerged with Andrew Jackson, where the Whigs and Democrats fought, and Jackson, who was a Democrat, eventually won the political race. Eventually, the Whig Party fell apart, but this doesn't mean that there was one-party rule, because as soon as the Whig Party collapsed, the Republican Party quickly reemerged and replaced the Whig Party. So once again, we have a two-party system with now the Democrats and the Republicans. It's important to remember that Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president, and during the Civil War, the North was Republican and the South was Democratic. Republicans dominated from 1861 to 1933, which is from President Lincoln's time to President Hoover's time, and in terms of American history, that's from the Civil War all the way to the Great Depression. They dominated during the Industrial Revolution and represented laissez-faire policy, which basically means free market, which in other words is just a way of saying that they promoted almost no government regulation on business. And that was one of the main reasons why we entered into the Great Depression. The Democrats dominated from 1933 to 1969. Roosevelt's victory of presidency was accomplished through forging the Roosevelt Coalition of Voters. The Roosevelt Coalition of Voters was basically a combination of different groups composed of Eastern workers, Southern and Western farmers, blacks, and the ideologically liberal that wanted to see Herbert Hoover defeated. Although the Democrats formally championed states' rights, their party platform changed significantly under Roosevelt. Democrats now favored strong central government. Democrats dominated both legislative and executive branches. However, the Supreme Court did check Roosevelt's power in his court packing plan. In an effort to get more support for his New Deal programs from the Supreme Court, Roosevelt basically had a court packing plan where he encouraged Congress to increase the number of justices from 9 to 15, and also to require mandatory retirement of justices by the age of 70. He did this because he wanted the Republican justices who were currently in the Supreme Court. He wanted them out of the Supreme Court so that the Democratic Party could have dominance in all three branches of government. However, this didn't happen because Roosevelt eventually withdrew his plan. Also during this time, the Democratic Party platform began to really focus on the blue-collar individual, which is what it is today. From 1969 to 2003, this was called a period in our history called the era of divided government. Richard Nixon's presidency really ushered in this era of divided government because in 1969, the executive branch was Republican and Congress was Democratic. A divided government brings with it the problem of gridlock, and gridlock is simply the tendency to paralyze decision-making, with one branch advocating one policy and the other branch advocating another, which leads to no conclusion being made because there's too much conflict among the two parties, which is very similar to what we have today in 2011. Although Republicans didn't dominate both Congress and presidency, they did dominate presidency from 1969 to 1993. They managed to dominate the presidency because they especially used electronic media to do polls and do computerized mailings to raise money. The Democratic Party wasn't really this advanced yet, and